Hierdie boek is vir my absoluut wonderlik, want Paula het nie vir Taliep ontmoet nie. En hoe gaan ons die geskiedenis van wat alles binne in Taliep was, en in David, en wat ons om ons begin sien het, toe hy begin werk het, en sy spesifieke talent aan ons, met ons gedeel het. En wat sy doen is, die boek is vir my soos een groot fantastiese orkes, met al hierdie stemme wat Paula self laat praat. Sy wek die mense op in Taliep se lewe en laat hulle vir jou vertel wat se man hy was, met sy foute, met sy talente, met sy diep liefde vir sy kultuur, vir Suid-Afrika, vir God, vir Afrikaans. So vir my is dit 'n baie, baie belangrike boek, omdat dit oor meer gaan dan net Taliep en die groot verlies van so 'n kunstenaar vir Suid-Afrika, en ons kan ook later daaroor praat. Welkom, Paula, welkom, David. Paula, ek begin met jou. Meer as 30 mense met wie jy gepraat het, maar vertel vir ons eers van die begin van die storie, want...
Ja, ek moet sê, daai ding van die verbintenis tussen my agtergrond as koordirigent en hierdie, hoe sal ek sê, navorsingsstrategie, ek het glad nie self daaraan gedink nie, so baie dankie. Ek dink, dis baie interessant. Ek dink, so hoe dit begin het is, ek was by die Drakensberg Seunskoor as een van die junior dirigente en het besluit om my PhD by Stellenbosch te doen en ek sou dit doen oor kore. So ek het toe die Malayer koorkompetisies in die Good Hope Sentrum begin bywoon en toe eendag toe sê Felicia Lesch, wat een van my kollegas is by Stellenbosch Universiteit, Taliep Petersen het altyd daar gesit. Dit is so 'n leë plastiek stoel en daai stoel het obviously by my 'n groot indruk gelaat. Ek het natuurlik geweet wie is Taliep, maar ek is 'n Pretoriaaner, so dit is 'n ander wêreld. Ja, hallo. Ex-Pretoriaaner.
2011, né? Dis nou omtrent daai
ja,
tyd.
2011, presies 2011. En ek was op 'n beurs by die universiteit en jy moes oor 3 jaar jou PhD doen, wat nogals druk is. En as jy nie weet wat jou onderwerp is nie, ek het eintlik eers Oktober van daai jaar besluit, dit gaan, en obviously it was in the air. Ek het toe eers, dit was dieselfde tyd wat David se biografie gepubliseer is, daai selfde jaar. Nie daarvan geweet voordat ek op die idee gekom het van Taliep nie. Kyk, ek praat baie vinnig, want as ek nie alles ingeryg kry, dit is eintlik 'n teken van hoeveel ek wil sê oor hierdie onderwerp.
Ja, maar jy sit met kompetisie hier, maar ek wil eintlik net hier inbreek, want ons het net voor ons op die verhoog gekom het, was dit vir my interessant, want David, want ek het natuurlik vir David en Taliep sien werk, hulle werk gesien, ek was hier toe daai cues om hier Baxter gestaan het vir daai musical, self in die gehoor gesit en gesien wat dit aan my gedoen het en ander mense, maar toe Paula na jou toe kom, was dit nou al lank na die tyd. En sy ontmoet toe vir jou, en vertel toe vir my hoe dit gegaan, want dit is interessant, want sy het gesê, sy het die musiek gesien het, sy het gekyk het na jy weet, hoe dit gewerk, jy weet, hierdie ongelooflike goed wat jy en Taliep saam gemaak het.
Ja, ek dink ek het Paula in die Baxter ontmoet, en sy het gevra of ek die musiek het, wat Taliep geskryf het, in bladmusiek, want sy wil het nou gaan analyseer of whatever, ontleed. En toe sê ek nie, maar daar bestaan nie soiets nie. En Taliep het nie die musiek neergeskryf nie. En hy het meestal op die computers gewerk. En dit is maar, as 'n mens sy werk daar wil gaan hoor, is het, jy weet wat hy op die computer gedoen, maar meestal het ons gesit met 'n gitaar of 'n klavier, en ons het die liedjies geskep, en die woorde neergeskryf en die akkoorde saam met die woorde, en ons sou nou maar net die melodieë in ons kop en ons het die soos Taliep gesê het. Hier is die computer, my broer, my computer, die kop en ons het die.
Is waar. Maar wat interessant is ook van Taliep, is hy was baie lank, hy het al probeer, deur die jare voordat District 6 die musical geskryf is hy nou betrokke geraak, almal in District 6 het gesing, wat ook baie belangrik is van daai lewe, het ek vriend van my wat ook sing, is dat die gemeenskap, daar was hierdie gemeenskaplike buddens, waar mense gaan bad het, en dan oefen die mans daar hulle kore, en hulle gesingery, en die gemeenskap, so van daar tel Taliep op sy pa, is baie streng, maar vir Taliep vind ek, die geskiedenis van die slawerny wat homself in District 6 begin blossom op 'n manier. Vertel 'n bietjie vir ons daarvan en hoe dit vir Taliep beïnvloed het. Want daai bly by hom sy hele lewe lank en dan vat hy vlek want hy wil die musiek vat van ancestors en hy wil dit nog nuut maak en hy werk met die ou van hoeste en jy weet. Maar dis 'n pad wat hulle moes geloop het saam as jy die 2 boeke lees om te kan maak wat ons vandag hier het. Hierdie manifestation van die geskiedenis en die kuns.
Man, as ek moet dink aan Taliep se lewe en sy oeuvre, is dit amper soos 'n veld vol gras. En daar's klomp wortels wat onder die grond geskiet het. En as mens kyk na, jy weet, District 6 the musical of jy weet, A Cat and the Kings, is dit maar, jy weet, 'n deursnee van die vrugte van klomp wortels en klomp ander projekte. En dis goeders wat hy, soos jy tereg opmerk, jy weet, sy hele lewe lank saam met hom gedra het. Dit is diep gewortel. En daarmee bedoel ek, jy weet, nie net die Guma musiek nie, maar jy weet die musiek wat vir hom so belangrik was, die Amerikaanse populêre musiek van District 6, want ek dink dis 'n kant van die district wat mense, jy weet, soms dis vir baie komplekse redes underplay en jy weet wil fokus op die folk music, maar daar was baie Taliep was baie verskillende dinge en van dit was baie modern en baie worldly en dit was my baie belangrik in die boek om dit uit te lig dat dit nie, jy weet, it wasn't all folksy, dis nou 'n quote wat ek nou uit jou onderhoud onthou.
Maar wat ook interessant is vir my, toe ek die boek lees en as ek kyk na die werk wat jy later gedoen het soos Guma, en my vriend Majid wat met wie ek praat oor die kode, die songs soos die moppies en die cartoons was eintlik polities in 'n manier. So hier, jy's 'n Afrikaner en elke nou en dan praat jy daaroor in die boek, want ek dink Paula is bewus van die feit van haar geskiedenis en waarvan dan sy kom en haar belangstelling en wat sy kan en nie kan doen nie of wat sy moet en nie kan vra nie, wat vir my nogal beautiful is want dan kom jy in as die koormeester en jy koor jouself 'n bietjie. Maar vir my wat belangrik is vir jonger mense om te kan sien dat daar is al lankal dis cartoons. Dit is mense wat gesing het oor die regering wat nie gedeliver het nie. Dit was 'n plek waar Taliep en mense soos Zane Adams en al daai mense nie 'n kans gehad het. Dit was 'n wêreld waar daar nie deure oop was vir hulle nie. En daar het hulle self begin deure oopmaak en die Amerikaners kan jy jou voorstel sou ikone gewees het, want dis die rebels daar, dis die Frank Sinatras, dis die crooners, jy weet, en wat vir my ook interessant is in die boek dit gaan oor gangsterisme wat so onder want I mean crime is really the flip side of capitalism in many ways, you know, en die mafia in New York was almal immigrante wat die geld kon kry nie. So daai belangrike deel, ek wou net vir David vra, want jou geskiedenis kom ook uit woeste, jy ek het jou vroeër gesê, ek dink jy's destined to be born nie. Toe vra jy vir my, wat bedoel jy? Ek het gesê, jy's veronderstel om in woeste gebore te word. Toe sê jy vir my, hoekom? Toe sê ek, want David het mos hierdie 4 maniere wat hy sê ons die wêreld kan verstaan. Dis politiek, die godsdienst, sport en die kunste. En die eerste 3 is verkeerd. Unreliable. They're very unreliable. So we have a young man growing up in Worcester in South Africa, also at some point being aware that there's a difference as well. And as an artist, want dit is wat jy eintlik doen. Vertel vir ons 'n bietjie van jou belangstelling dan in Suid-Afrika se musiek self, en jou want jy het ook begin protes maak. Ons het nie geweet wat 'n soort van mense is jy. Jy kom van woeste af, jy sing jy in Afrikaans en jy klink 'n bietjie Kaaps en jy's left-wing en jy was in Londen en jy het musicals gedoen. Sê jy's ook iets wat jy weet in die wêreld ontpop en vir ons laat kyk. So vertel ons 'n bietjie van hoe die geskiedenis van musiek in Suid-Afrika. Of is dit later wat jy daar by Taliep aansluit waar jy begin verstaan die diepere. Dis nie net oor
kroning. So die mees belangrikste ding vir my is, well, firstly, wat my beïnvloed het op Worcester, was die kunstskool natuurlik. Ek het kuns gestudeer en ek het geleer om aan die wêreld te kyk. So dis 'n belangrike ding om na die wêreld om jou te kyk en miskien dit probeer teken en ek het ook met poësie begin werk. Ek was eintlik meer my belangstelling was meer met poësie. En ek het musiek gevat saam met Kramer op skool. Maar ons het meer gepraat van moderne poetry in daai jare as wat ons met musiek gedoen gehad het. My belangstelling in musiek was rock and roll. I was born with rock and roll. I was born in 1951. The first rock and roll I heard was in 1957, 6 years old. It was Little Richard, Fats Domino, Buddy Holly, Bill Haley and the Comets. So dit is begin van wat ons dink as rock and roll. So ek is so oud soos rock and roll. Okay. En my belangstelling as tiener was net rock and roll. Maar toe ek op universiteit kom, begin ek as folksinger optree en ek sing 'n paar ander mense se liedjies soos Cat Stevens en so aan. En ek moet nou optree voor 'n hostile English student audience, and I come from South Africa, and I realized I can't I can't do this stuff. So the first identity crisis pictures up there, like who are you and what, you know, who do you want to be, and as an artist. So as an artist, you start to think about your voice. What are you going to say, and how are you going to say it? And my interest in folk music starts there. And the idea, one of the big ideas that I get from reading is about Bob Dylan, not wanting to be like Bob Dylan, but trying to understand how he went to work. And Bob Dylan realized that what he needed to do was connect to the folk roots of America. And he tries to connect to the folk roots through Woody Guthrie. And he sings like Woody Guthrie in the beginning, and that influences him a lot. And so you start to think about, okay, so within the American kind of musical history, there's a long tradition. You know, it doesn't just pop out, as you say, pop out of nowhere. Daar's 'n tradisie en daar's wortels en daai tradisies, die diep wortels waarvan jy praat. And I think, so what's my tradition, you know? What's my tradition? And all I could think of was the only kind of folk music that I had any connection to was Afrikaans folk music. So, but I thought, okay. I wasn't really thrilled about that idea. But I started looking at Afrikaans folk music, and as I'm looking at it, I'm reading the lyrics. The penny drops, and I realize, but this is older, and this is not written by white people. This comes out of slavery and out of post-slavery on farms. So a white person wouldn't write Bobbejaan klim die berg om die boere te vererg, right? So that's important. And then I started to research and investigate Afrikaans folk tunes, but especially the ones that I didn't regard as white tunes. So most of those volksliedjies in the FRK bundle come out of an age-old tradition. And so my attempt in Afrikaans, because I was writing in English for 10 years, so my first attempt in Afrikaans was to connect to the older songs. And I started writing things like, Kuba, jy lyk vir my verlore, met jou hare so kort en my ore. Ja. En as jy bang vir jou ma, as jy bang vir jou pa, as jy bang vir die spooke van die os en die wa.
You sien, jy kan net so iets sê in Afrikaans of Afrikaaps. Jy kan nie so iets sê in Engels nie nou, né? So jy's gegift Afrikaans soos ek. Dis in my tong in my mond ingedruk die taal. Maar ek is baie bly hy's ingedruk, want ek kan Afrikaans praat en verstaan en lees. So ons mense neem die taal terug, want jy's ook 'n insider outsider op 'n manier, né?
Ja.
Anyway, maar Paula, jy het nooit vir Taliep ontmoet nie. En hier kom jy aan en waar begin jy vas? Jy kry hierdie hoe noem jy dit, 'n hele biblioteek of 'n hele library of 'n whole lifetime Tell me about his what was one called it? His hoe kan het met so verskriklik om te sê wat los jy mens, jou legacy, jou jy weet.
Well, there's a term in sociological research that we call snowball sampling. Het klink verskriklik droog, maar dit basies beteken, you flick a pebble and it picks up weeds like a rolling stone, but it actually does pick up things. So in other words, it was a letter to Taliep's dad in Menenberg, to Butadimpi. Where do you begin? And then, you sit down and you meet, and he says, let's do this. And Taliep's brother set up meetings and introduced me to people, een vir een. En ook Taliep het 'n verskriklike groot argief gehad. Daar was net bokse en bokse en bokse in 'n slaapkamer in sy broer se huis. En hulle het my toestemming gegee om deur daai 20 bokse dokumente te werk en te kyk wat ek wil gebruik. So dit was baie onwetenskaplike.
As 'n researcher, ek kan vir jou sê as ek 'n joernalis was en ek stap in 'n kamer in met soveel bokse, dis soos die Gupta leaks.
Maar ek wil sê daar's iets wat ek dink 'n joernalis wat 'n redelike kort turnaround time het.
Ja.
Maar daar's iets in hierdie boek wat wel getuig van 10 jaar se, van 'n jaar deur dokumente werk. But it's slow intimacy op 'n manier met jou subject matter. En
ek lag ook baie die boek want al die mense met wie sy gaan praat is baie like hier kom 'n wit vrou hier om ek vra oor Taliep, julle sê niks.
Maar ek dink die tipe insider-outsider is baie verantwoordelik vir die boek wat ons hier het.
Natuurlijk, daarom is dit belangrik om daai te wees.
En die feit dat ek die mense wil laat praat en jy weet ek het ook gevoel ek het nie die man geken nie. So as David nou iets sê, jy weet ek gebruik die onderhoudmateriaal amper as dialoog in 'n roman dat hierdie mense kan praat en ek was so bang vir hulle woorde deur die lens van myself en dit was altyd 'n once removed en jy sit layers op en dit is nooit 'n genuine weerspieëling van die inligting wat vir jou gegee is nie. Dit is alles 'n interpretasie. So dit was my poging om op 'n manier bietjie terug te staan en te sê, well, let this man be collectively created by the people who knew him, not some white girl who's coming and being,
And then to check the facts. En wat vir my so mooi is in die storie ook is hoe die van ons wat dink ons is goed van wat ons doen en iemand sien ons nie raak nie. Elke nou en dan sê ons vir onsself ons het iets gewen en ons het nie. Jy weet, ons moes dit gewen het, maar ons het nie. En dit is so beautiful om te sien Taliep wat weet hy het sy talent en daar is die plekke waar hy kan gaan om te kompeteer nie, maar hy hou self hierdie dokumente en skryf self. Dus so jy leer hom ken en hoe hy dan goedjies in 'n boek begin plak in die begin, soos jy weet mense nou maar doen. En interessant, Taliep se aanknopingspunt met die waar David met die American folk wat eintlik en Dylan wat ook resistance movement is, het Taliep hulle ook daar nie met daai musiek nie, maar ook die Amerikaners op 'n selfde manier het hulle bevry.
Ek dink een ding wat belangrik hier is om te onthou is die mite of die illusie dat swart Amerikaners op 'n manier vryheid het en 'n welstand wat swart Suid-Afrikaners nie het nie. Daar was hierdie idee van, wow.
Die gangsters, die klere.
Well, not even that, musicians.
Yeah. Oh, Frank Sinatra was a mafioso, so I mean, really, he was close to
and
the
I call it an illusion because, of course, now, all the police violence and that. I mean, but there was this idea that, I think Christopher Ballantyne, the ethnomusicologist, has got a quote, where America fascinated, black America infatuated. And speaking specifically of, dispossessed South Africans who are looking at a sort of an other society that's a kind of a mirror and thinking, but people there are stars. There's black artists who are really making it big and sort of missing it's interesting, the whole Klopse tradition as a whole is in a way seizing on the sort of deeply racist images of the minstrel stage, but doing so in a spirit of affinity with black Americans, not in the spirit in which those symbols came to exist in America. So it's maar net simbole reis en hulle word iets anders op ander plekke.
Taliep se pa was baie streng geweest en hy was baie betrokke met die kore. En ek dink wat vir my interessant is van die kore destyds in sokker en rugby is dit vir jong mans en jong seuns 'n plek gegee om gemeenskaplik te leer of te saam te wees, jy weet. Vertel ons 'n bietjie van Taliep se pa en hoe Taliep hoe hy hom ingesleep het eendag dat hy moes sing. En wat is die invloed van Taliep se pa op Taliep se eie carrière daarna?
I wonder if we shouldn't pass this question to you if you'd like to tell one of the stories that Taliep told about his childhood. Because I mean, I got them, a lot
From
of them
David.
from David,
Okay.
so I
Ja.
would just be sort of
Ja, lekker. Ja.
middlemaning.
Ja, Taliep het vir my vertel, jy weet eendag dit was maar net voor een van die klopse kompetisies. En daar was is altyd 'n juvenile section. En dan moet 'n laities iets sing vir die klops. En ek dink daar was 'n die jong mannetjie wat sou gesing het, hy daag nie op nie. En dit is nou laat in die aand en Taliep se pa kom in sy kamer in en hy maak hom wakker. Hy sê Paula. Sy bynaam was Paula. Paula, kan jy sing? Ja, nou kom sing. En toe moet Taliep nou afgaan en saam met die koor sing. En Taliep natuurlik hy het alles baie fyn. Hy het seker op die kante gesit en alles geluister. So hy het al die woorde geken en al die musiek geken en hy het 'n groot indruk op sy pa gemaak. Dat hy daai aand kon sing het en toe is hy nou deel van die hele klopse tradisie en hy wen prys na prys en jy weet met die klopse. So dit is waar dit begin het en later dan jy het gepraat van competities. I mean, he was very competitive and he wanted to be seen. And then the star bioscope and the talent competitions became important for him to be. And you will see in those cutting books of his, where whenever he got a mention to be, when he won Mr. Entertainment, was very, very important. And the competition between him and Zane, big competition.
So I think that's also what's beautiful in this book for me is that it's also a history of the other artists who were around at that time and forced to work and make a living and a career where there was no state subsidy, where there was absolutely no interest.
Yeah, but
you're on your own.
But it's interesting because that was interesting to me. Like so why was there so much music in District 6 and why did people make that choice? But in those apartheid years, it was a better choice than, say, the kind of employment opportunities that existed. I mean, you didn't want to become a bus conductor or pencil sharpener off that kind of or a messenger. So if you didn't want to participate in that kind of indignity. So it was more dignified to stay unemployed and sing for your supper, and so that and so that became a very important thing to become part of, say, the Golden City Dixies, and that was a lifestyle and a way of living, and the dream was always to make a financial success out of it and a professional career out of it, which I think was driving Taliep a lot in those early years. See me, you must see me. I can do this. I'm better than everyone else. I can, and to like get recorded, to go up to Johannesburg and to, sign that first contract and almost sing anything, I mean, those first records, just kind of rubbish pop music that he sang.
But in a sense, just absolutely making it his own when he does sing them, But then for me also, just Paula, very importantly, growing up, you learn to sing some of those Nederlandse nikkies and things in, when you go to the madrasa, when you go to school, when you go to Muslim school, you learn to sing. That's where you learn how to do it properly, in a sense. So it runs through all of the music, all of the time.
Well, it's interesting what you ask because I think that the sacred music of South Africa's Muslims is a lot less visible to people who are not in that community because it happens, at dhikrs, it happens in closed spaces. But at the same time, sort of a lot of Muslims wouldn't consider the adhan at all as music, right? So, but it's the vocal inflection. I mean, David can chip in here as well. But I mean, certainly there is, I would say, sort of certain stylistic traits that underlie a lot of that music. I mean, the Nederlandslied, which has that mean, Taliep was once asked to describe it musically, and he said it's Eastern notes on top of Western notes. So it's definitely sort of a marriage between worlds, and it in the history, the history of coming over on the slave ships is in that music, not only in the Dutch language, but in the rhythm, some people would say, and then also, of course, the influence of Islam, which came later more properly. A lot of slaves converted to Islam here in Cape Town. I don't know if that answers your question. It's a bit random.
No, what's interesting was if you listen to Portuguese fado music or Iberian music, there's a lot of Islamic trace to it. Right. Fado music is, you'll recognize it. We've heard it somewhere before, and it's beautiful that that Taliep and David both heard it and kept it alive, because it was done at quite a bit of having to fight for that in a way, because the sacred music, those who are the keepers of culture and sacred music don't like it to be modernized or exposed and perhaps, sullied in some way. But so Taliep did take on quite a few, I suppose, battles.
Yeah, that was his.
Tell us a bit about it in terms of
Rosa was an album he recorded with Sapphire in 1983, I think, and it was very much there. We took the project of taking a bunch of old Nederlands liedjes and ouliedere and modernizing it, and he did get a lot of pushback from the community about that. I mean, but again, this is like speurwerk. I mean, it's there, it's under the surface. No one really wants to talk about it out loud, because I think people don't want to criticize someone who can't, answer back to the criticism. There's respect for Taliep, as there should be. But there definitely he got a lot of, how can you, roe, sa, it's just so different to the way the song is sung, and it's one of the most beloved songs in Cape Town. So, and then that is a pattern. I mean, later with...
So there, what you're dealing with there is you're dealing with traditionalists and conservative tradition. Don't mess with the tradition. This happens all over the world. You mustn't come along and take something we've been doing, even though that tradition has evolved out of another tradition, There's an evolution in say, let's say, folk music, and let's not confuse the Kasida music with the Malay liedjies and so on. But so, because that's what Taliep did the first time, was take the Nederlandse liedjies and the moppies and those things and try to make it into pop music, okay, with the Rosa album. Then many years later, he went into the religious side of that kind of music, and again push back on that one. You're not supposed to do that either, But he had seen in Indonesia and in Malaysia, how different it is there, the approach to music from. I don't want to. Don't know much about Islam and the Muslim thing and that, but I just know what Taliep was involved with there. But this thing about tradition is that. People don't want you to change anything. And that is exactly as it is here in Cape Town with the Malay choir board. Jy moet het sing soos dit altyd gesing was, and you've got to wear the same clothes that they've always worn, even though those things come from different places. Kufia from Turkey and the blazer from somewhere else.
Maar wat interessant is ook vir my, wat mense is altyd bang oor godsdienst te praat in Islam, maar die Kaapse Islam is van Indonesië. Die Wahhabis van die Saudi-Arabië is 'n strenger vorm van Islam. En die Kaapse mense het groot geword met 'n Islam wat baie oper was, wat baie meer Turkies was, soos jy weet, mense kon sing, mense kon dinge doen. En ons het gesê Fourie pang en pisang en baya, al daai Afrikaanse woorde kom van daai lande. So as mense begin sê jy kan die Afrikaans gebruik, of jy weet, dis maar net soos David sê, mense is bang. En die Afrikaners was ook bang vir hulle musiek, wat hulle gedink het mense sal, jy weet, oopmaak vir iets. Maar Paula, 10 jaar is 'n lang tyd. Maar kom ons praat eers oor District 6 die musical, want vir baie lang tyd was District 6 deel van Taliep se vision. Hy wou District 6 à la carte gedoen, daai goed van sy kleintyd en van sy musiekkleintyd, hy wou iets met dit doen. Hy wou altyd iets met dit doen. Vertel 'n bietjie vir ons van die begin, en dan hoe julle twee geklik het en moes ontmoet het. Soos David Hay gesê het, making art that made sense.
Ek dink die eerste keer wat Taliep oorsee was saam met Terry Fortune in 79. In dis waar hy, was really exposed to a lot of really good quality musicals, and that's where he, in the words of Terry Fortune, said, I'm going to go back to South Africa and write my own musical. And the first manifestation of that was his Carnival a la District 6, which, is more probably what we would sort of recognize as a review, different songs, a variety show in a show. But this thing about Taliep working hard in the early years, I mean, that is no understatement. I mean, he kept a company of 30 people employed for 3 years under very difficult circumstances. From, their first sponsor was Holiday Inn, and eventually, after 3 years, they were completely financially independent, and they were touring this thing around the country. It was not the fully fledged musical Taliep had dreamt of, and he knew that. And that's, of course, where David comes in. I mean, I know Taliep had plans to revisit his musical when he met you.
Tell us a bit about when you arrive in London and you see musicals, or you decide, when you go to university.
No, I had no interest in musicals when I arrived there.
Oh, okay. Where did you see?
I went to study in Leeds.
Yes.
I wasn't in London.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Okay. So my interest was in folk music, as I told you. So that's something different. The interest in musicals only starts much, much later. When I have my first hits with Royal Hotel and Blokkies and those songs, and I start working with Barney Simon from the Market Theatre, and he says, and we do Elsie Zitzman, I bumped into her yesterday. She was here, and we did a concert called the David Kramer Jol, and she was Lang Vlam, and Jennifer Stein was Kort Vlam, and so we did this kind of variety concert. Under Barney Simon's direction, and he said to me, you should write songs for other people. And so I started to give some of my songs, like to Elsie Zitzman and to Jennifer Stein, to sing in those concerts. And I became interested in this idea of writing for voices other than my own, and and especially female voices that could sing. I mean, I've got this limited, 5-note range. But I knew what I wanted to hear. Anyway, that's how my musical interest started. And I thought I should write a musical. And my first idea was like around the Royal Hotel. I must write a musical because I had these hits, and so that would be a good idea, pull the hits into the musical, and that's. And I had no idea what I was doing, and what a difficult task it is, and so it came to nothing. I worked on it for a few years, with Barney sort of tearing up everything I wrote, and saying, start again. And I thought, no, I'm not starting it, and I threw it away, And so I left that. And then I got to a point in 1985, just after that concert, and I started to, 1986. I was in Johannesburg, and I pick up the newspaper, and it's the anniversary of the declaration of District 6 as a white group area. So it's in February, 11th of February, and I see District 6 was declared white 20 years ago. And it started me thinking about the place District 6, which had become sort of a forgotten issue, not for the people who had been kicked out of there, but in the media. It was a forgotten issue in the media. And I thought, my interest in old folk music and, the traditional stuff, like the Klopse stuff and the District 6, because of this Creole language and the Creole music, that is the birthplace of so much of the stuff I'm interested in. And then District 6 has a political issue, which I'm interested in. And so suddenly I thought, well, this would make a good idea for a musical, and I started to work on that. I started to create characters and started to think about that. And because it was the anniversary, they had an exhibition at the Civic Centre. photographs, Janse Visser photographs and so on, and there was some film shown, and so one day I went along to see a film called Grandfather, Your Right Foot is Missing, and I bumped into Taliep there, and we knew each other from before, and he kind of, let's have coffee, we said. I said, yeah, I want to talk to you because I want to write a musical. And he says, yeah, me too. I also want to write a musical. Let's go and have coffee. I said, yeah, it's about District 6. And so I said, and I've written some stuff already. So come to, and he came round to me the next day, and we started to talk about this. I mean, I was aware of Carnival à la District 6, but I'd never seen it. And I knew he'd grown up in District 6, and I now was at a point where I realized I have to work with someone who knows what they're talking about, and not just like reading it in books and researching like I do. And also the political situation was that I would never be able to write as a so-called white person this thing, and we needed to do this as a partnership. And so Taliep came round to my house, and we were very suspicious of each other. Taliep thinking, wat wil die ou van my hê? What, Yeah, there was and I'm thinking, do I really want to work with someone else? I've written hit songs, and now what am?
Lone Ranger.
Yeah, I was always absolutely a lone ranger. I had always written on my own.
Well, you had Rene.
Yeah, but I mean, but the writing process. I'd never collaborated with anyone before, so that was something completely new. And yeah, we were like two boxes, seeing.
And both of you also successful in your up to there, and Taliep very charming. I mean, that smile.
But absolutely,
also,
yeah.
Carry on.
So I'd written the lyric of 7 Steps of Stone. So I gave that to him, and I said, okay, here's a lyric I've written. Maybe you should go home and put some music to it, and then we see. In other words, I'll judge you tomorrow, And that's how it started. It started with the very last song of District 6, the musical, and it also started with Broodjie my bra, because I had written Broodjie my bra and I played it to him, and that made him sit up and take notice.
And Klop Klop, the song
I hadn't
too.
written that yet.
Yeah, not yet.
No.
Well, I mean, I had it on. Every kids listen to it today still, and everyone sings it, and it's beautiful. And as you say, it's difficult. When Paula met you to say.
So what happened with Klop Klop was, so now we were starting to write this musical, and the way it worked was, Taliep would come to my house in the morning, and I had a piano in the studio, and then we would sit at the piano, and we'd work on something, and we'd discuss maybe a scene, the characters in the scene, and what's supposed to happen. Then he'd go home, and in the evening I would write the scene, or write a lyric or something, and then the next morning when he comes in, then I show him what I've written. Then he works on it a bit, and then we work on the lyrics, and he takes the lyrics and he starts to do the melodies or something around that. He sits, like he just would go take the lyrics, sit with the guitar, and then play me something, and then I could comment on that again. So it was it was a collaboration, give and take. My side was more creating the story and the words and lyrics, and Taliep the music. So we got to a point, and I said, we need like a Guma song here, we need that, something, it needs that tempo. I said, dice chocolates, my bro, chocolates. And so he came the next day. He says, that's your ding. well, he didn't throw it down because he picked up the guitar. He's your dong. And he played. Okay, so that was the melody, and that's what he came up with. And he left that with me. Now I had to write the lyric to that. Yeah, and I wasn't used to writing like that, taking the melody and then finding words to fit that. And then the melody went da 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 da. I thought, what the fuck am I doing?
Nou sing ons dit almal net die hele tyd. Dit is so maklik, hè?
And then you get like klop, klop. And it goes klop, klop. Klop. Okay, so that's solved. That was the biggest problem for me, to find what's going to go on. What words do you put on?
Yeah. So what Paula catches in her book also, which is something those of us who are lone rangers sometimes and creatives, is the alchemy of the creative process when two people come together and they're generous with each other. You know, we make something new and beautiful, and it's a very sacred space once you're in it. If you don't know it, I've had it once or twice or 3 times in my life, and you always want it again. You want another person who knows, jy gaat ons met die joke. En ook die manier waarop David praat en wat Taliep gepraat het, is ook vir my so mooi, waar mense praat nie meer Afrikaans of hulle bang om Afrikaans te praat. En my vriend, Anwa, ek noem hom baie, hy het my gesê, as jy klopse sing, dan moet jy nie geduintjies vir jou aansit hê. Nou, jy sal dat hy nie in Afrikaans gesê het nie. Jy sal nie gedink het met 'n Afrikaanse algemene beskaafde gedagte om te sê vir iemand, jy moenie gordyntjies vir jou aansit nie. So ek gee vir baie Afrikaanse mense,
Of jy moenie as jy nou posh wil praat,
Ja.
moenie visie spoeg nie.
jy, kyk haar mense, dis jazz. So wat ek doen is ek gee vir al die mense wat Afrikaans praat of die Engelse mense wat geleer het, gee ek boeke soos Coupon en Chase Reise, kinders, en ek sê, lees hy vir my in Afrikaans asseblief. Hulle kan nie. Hulle moet, ons moet vir hulle maak dat hulle dit publicly lees. Hulle kan praat soos ek praat, want die is Afrikaans. En dis mooi en dis jazz. Paula, jy's 'n Afrikaner. Well, nee, your heritage is that, which is also
Not the same as being
not
a
the same. But you're from where did you grow up?
Yeah, my background is very de mekaar. I mean, I
Ons
was...
is almal die mekaar.
I was
mixed
too-
masala.
Ons is allemaal brakke.
Ja, nee,
brakke.
absolutely. Ek is my ouers was diplomate gewees. So ek is op ouderdom 2 Engeland toe, ouderdom 4
shame.
New York toe, ouderdom 6 Wenen toe en toe terug. Ek was in 'n Duitse skool vir my hele laerskoolloopbaan. Toe in Afrikaanse hoërskool, Afrikaanse meisieskool Pretoria. So very very de mekaar, maar ek dink in Engels. So dit jy weet, so dit is wel 'n is interessant want my ouers wat gewerk het in die diplomatieke diens in die laaste jare van apartheid, ironically their children got the most cosmopolitan upbringing with all the sort of influences that, you know, the nationalist Christian Afrikaner people didn't want to give their children. So it's a legacy that I, you know, acknowledge. I mean, I do remember in '94 saying to my dad in the embassy in Vienna, I heard something, I was 9, you know, we need a new South Africa. 1994, I'm 9 years old, and I don't know why. I don't know much about South Africa. I just know that the embassy plays me these videos with like springbokkies and things.
It's sunny today in South Africa.
Basically. And I mean, there was very little, and I remember saying, why do we need a new South Africa? And I was told, you'll see when we get there. And I say that because it's kind of schrijnend how little young white Afrikaners born in my era were equipped to deal with life in this country. At Afrikaanse woord meisieskool, I mean, do you think I learned anything that I can use to navigate this world? No. And I'm talking about history. I'm talking about my place in this country. It was just not addressed. So I think people often ask me, why Taliep Petersen? The answer is I don't know, because he was interesting. 10 years, that's the more interesting question. Why couldn't I stop? And it's got something to do with the responsibility of writing history, because the thing about history is what you write down becomes history. In an oral community, it's a hell of a responsibility, and you know, to get it right, or as right as you possibly can. But the other thing that I really learned about my own country through following Taliep's story, I consider him my great teacher. in all of this. And it's interesting because this book has been, it's been everywhere, like many different publishers. I mean, it was, at one point it was a really academic book. And I remember one of the peer reviewers said, it seems as if Fourie is learning the history of her country together with a reader. It's not necessary. I mean, I used to sort of stop and tell you all about Black consciousness, and then I would stop and tell you about Steve Biko, because I was just learning these things that I just didn't know. So I think this is my education as a young South African writing this book, and that's why I'm so grateful for the opportunity to having told the story. Thank you.
Dankie. Baie. En dit is 'n geskiedenisboek en ek dink wat vir my belangrik is dat ons jong mense sal kan leer oor dinge wat hulle nou dink is boring, want ek en David het ook vroeër gepraat op skool toe hulle vir ons nou in wit skole. Ons was al drie wit hier. Wat interessant is, want Jake Scherwel was ook een van daai mense in ons celebrate hom by die Suidoostefees. Ek dink as jy jouself sien as groot van 'n groot diversiteit, dan wit mense in Suid-Afrika is baie gelukkig dat hulle 'n minority is, want daar's so baie goedjies wat jy kan van leer of kosse wat jy kan eet of jy raak. I read something the other day, the more languages you speak, the more souls you get, which is quite nice, want dis waar. Met Afrikaans het ek 'n ander siel gekry. Regtig, ek voel dit so. Maar David, I think let's talk a little bit about Taliep the man. But he's quite controversial, want ek dink Taliep was ook baie privaat geweest as 'n mens in sy familie en mense het nie uitgepraat oor dinge nie. En ek wil nie daaroor praat vandag nie, maar as 'n man was hy ook baie patriargaal op 'n manier en ek dink maar sy dogters en die vroue om hom het hom ook maar lekker geskel as ons van die Kaap.
Ja, hier
Sy ma, hy was baie na aan sy ma ook, baie lief vir sy ma.
Ek dink hier moet mense eintlik teruggaan na Taliep se opvoeding in sy huis met sy pa, want dit baie dinge word herhaal. Jy weet die roster wat jy op die deur plak en jy weet 2 uur kom die kinders huis toe en eet hulle en dit dan gaan hulle madrasa toe. Jy weet so ek dink hy het ek dink sy pa het hom verskriklik hard groot gemaak en daar was ook jy weet ons almal het pak gekry toe ons klein was. Taliep het regtig pak gekry. En ek dink jy weet daai patterns, we are fated in a way to replicate the patterns around us. Unless we, can break through generational trauma. But I mean, I do think he was a very strict man. One of the things about Taliep's children that I really, really admire about them is that as one, they speak about the memory of a man. Hulle mis hom verskriklik. Hulle is baie lief vir hom. Maar nie een van hulle wil hom op 'n pedestal sit en weier om te sien. Hy was 'n komplekse mens met skete, met wonderlike dinge. Hulle gee die mees verfrissende blik. En I'm just saying, it's surprising, want iemand wat hulle het hulle pa verloor toe hulle eintlik nog kinders was. And yet, to manage to still look at that person as a complex human being, I think that's a real thing to get a pat on the back for want of a better thing to say. But it was hard.
David is difficult in the public eye, as jy in die publieke oog is, om net gesien te word vir jou kuns. Jy weet dis wat jy wil hê, mense moet geniet, jy sê wat jy wil sê in jou kuns en in jou musiek, en dis wat vir my ongelooflik was van Taliep, die joy, his joy of life. He always smiled. He was always, when he walked into the room, unless he was the moerien, but that you are at home. Jy kan mos jou vieslike self wees by die huis. As jy nie jou vieslike self kan wees nie, dan waar gaan jy dit doen? But he was really a person who brought an extraordinary energy into the room with him. He was a life force when I recall meeting him.
Yeah, but you had to be careful of him.
Okay.
Yeah, he had a hell of a temper.
Okay.
He had a hell of a temper, and especially with music, if you were singing for him, you had to sing on pitch.
Really?
Yeah.
There's no machine helping you beforehand.
No machine, and so he took it to extremes. Yeah, so
but he was very disciplined as well. I mean, Taliep
yeah,
would
but
get up every day and work.
It was an aspect that I found disturbing. That he was, and it comes from his father.
Do you understand? I mean, having read
so
Paula's book and knowing,
there's a lot of this kind of hand-me-down chauvinism and discipline and extreme expectation. His father expected him, like, he will tune the guitar once for Taliep. That's it. When Taliep came the second time to have the guitar tuned, he got beaten because he didn't listen the first time. So Taliep trained his ears to listen, so you could play a note for him, he had perfect pitch. So you could tell you what that note was. I have to go to the guitar and find out what that note is.
Yeah. So it must have been hard for you
so
to
he
work
had perfect pitch. And the other thing was,
Sorry, I interrupted
I
you there.
lost my
Yeah, sorry.
train of thought.
But you're also not easy to work with either. I mean, you're also your own person, and you can be grumpy, and you will also not want things to be done. So the two of you together.
Am I really?
Yeah, we all are. We all are. But like, so how did the two of you, that aspect of both of you, because you're artists and you know what you want to do.
So that's
and-
what's interesting, is that we got along very well.
Ah,
We never had arguments,
matched.
other than artistically. The one area we might have argued would have been religion, and we never went there.
Yeah, we shouldn't.
We never went there, and then there were, yeah. So of course I'm difficult to work with as well, because I have similar things with standards
And expectation.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
yourself, you've put in the work.
yeah. So I'm just saying that, unfortunately, the way he grew up was that he was kind of traumatized into being super efficient and super. So that this thing about you've got to do it perfectly. And his father used to send him out. His father was a taxi driver, and the sakehuise in District 6, Taliep would have to go and fetch the monies from, because his father would drop off customers at the sakehuise, and then he would get, there would be money involved that he didn't necessarily get on that night. And then Taliep would be sent the next day to go and collect from certain people. And so he couldn't ask his father twice about, how do I get there? So he had a map of District 6 in his head.
Mm-hmm.
I remember going with him to the wasteland of District 6 and walking with him, and him saying, now this street was this, and on that corner there was that building, and this one worked there, and there was on that corner there was these buildings and those shops, and he kind of had this 3D memory of the whole of District 6, and we could walk right through that, as I say, wasteland, few cobblestones and things, and he could describe it to me from that memory of that childhood memory the experience that he went through. I mean, I don't remember anything like that,
Was it so assaulting?
You go back to a town and places have been knocked down. You can't remember what was there. Okay.
I want to say something just about this idea of Taliep being this joyous force as well, and also about the complexities of writing a text that is contentious in certain ways, and the need to protect my informants, for want of a better word. I mean, everyone who was interviewed did so, knowing it would be on record, using their names, and everyone signed, disclaimer forms. But now you've still got like one lone voice saying, like Madiga saying, Taliep hit me on the head when I sang out of tune. And sort of in the writing of the book, not wanting to isolate her or make her a target for anyone. So I would always sort of cluster together, someone would say something, oh, I can't say that. I say, don't worry, 2 people have already said it, and to sort of, in the writing, have multiple voices saying these things that are contentious in order to not make someone feel like they're now the one spilling beans that they shouldn't, And I think that enabled the book to be sort of more honest. I mean, people don't want to talk about these things, and this goes back to the 10-year thing. I had 4 interviews with Madiga. I had 5 interviews with you, and that the slow sort of opening up, and very often it wasn't like I was mining for that information particularly. It was very much an open-ended interview. You steer it where you want to steer it, and it goes to certain places. I mean, I also say in the book, this started out as a PhD in musicology. I mean, I had zero interest in 16 December, when Taliep was murdered. Zero interest. But interviewees, people want to talk about it. So in the end, when I wrote the book, and I felt, well, this has to be more comprehensive now than just a musicological treatise, I had so much information about it. So I think that enabled me to write about things that are difficult to write about, just sort of crowdsourcing Taliep in a way. And this thing about him being joyful at the event I don't know if you remember, at the Woordfeest. And Terry Fortune, told me this story about Taliep being so, I can't remember what it was. And he was saying, there's not enough in the book about that side of Taliep. And I said to Terry, well, had you told me that story, it would have been in the book. which is just to say that it's very much a reflection of what I got. And it's going to be incomplete, and it's going to give heavier credence to one side than the other, and that's just a reflection of, as a biographer, you throw a net and you catch things and you look at it, and it's always going to be incomplete. But that's why this terrible responsibility of now having written Taliep's story. I mean, it's hard.
Well, I think it's very important, and you've mentioned the 16th of December now, which is, for, at a point you're reading this book, and we all know what happens to Taliep, and for me it's like this full stop on life. Guma, that the two of you made, was such a special and beautiful culmination, I think, for Taliep. And before we talk about that, the impact of the musical, District 6, the musical, that production that ran for so long in Cape Town, and so many people went to see it, and it changed so many young people, and it gave expression and validation and the language, the humor, everything. It just overrode all the other kak we'd been dealing with for such a long time. So speak to us a little bit about the aftermath. Excuse, ek is van Pretoria, as you say. What did it mean for Taliep then? And then this sudden, this violent and very Cape Town story as well, which for me has always been just unfathomable in a way. If we can, and then we can open up to questions if you'd like to ask some questions. So the impact of the musical itself afterwards, at the time, the two of you then.
So what happened with the musical is the Baxter gets involved, and we do Renee and I do a joint production with the Baxter to bring District 6 onto the stage. And that's in 1987, and 1987 in April. And so we it starts off with a traditional Baxter audience in those years, which was mainly white people come to see the show. And it's not what Taliep and I wanted, So we have a few weeks like this, and we start to think about how we're going to attract, the people who were affected by the forced removals. We want them to hear the story. The white people are kind of, yes, watching it, we've read about this, but there's not that connection to the musical. And Taliep has the brilliant idea of saying, well, maybe we should go to the soccer clubs and the cricket clubs and to the, to the Malay choirs and sell fundraisers to them, which is what we do. And people felt more comfortable coming with other people that they knew. So we started to get these pockets of fundraiser audiences, and then it took off. It took off because then the word of mouth spread, and suddenly the audience went from being, 90% white to being 90% brown, or mixed audiences. And of course the reaction then is absolutely, how can I describe it? It's such a powerful reaction, and it's cathartic at the same time. Because people see themselves on the stage for the first time. They hear themselves talking and singing, and the music, and as you say, validation. It's a validation process, and people are able to talk about this pain, which has been suppressed for 20 years. And so the timing of the musical, it just like it's a nerve. It's a very, very sore wound that's under the surface in Cape Town, and it just explodes. And that's why people were sleeping outside the theatre at night to try and get tickets, to see it. And that's why it played 550 performances here to 350,000 people. Okay, 350,000 people is a lot of rugby stadiums. Okay.
Also 1987, if people remember, there's a book that's been written about the whole year, 1986. So when the young people complained to me about COVID in 2020, I said, luister, hulle het 'n hele fucking boek geskryf voor 1986, gaat lees dit. Julle ouers is deur daai jaar. And so it was a bad year in this country, a lot of deaths, terrible year, a lot of detentions, a lot of death. a lot of
State
fear.
of emergency, terrible time.
It was
yeah.
a state of emergency, and
Yeah.
so it's difficult for us older people sometimes to try and say to young people, "Do you actually realize what that was?" You know what I
I
mean?
was 1 year old.
Ag nee man, Jesus,
1986.
dit raak nou so erg. Mense
Ja.
kan dit nie glo nie.
But yeah, so for Taliep, you know, yeah, you know,
he did it.
yeah,
got it. He did
that
it.
was important. He'd written a musical with me. It was on stage. It was an important musical, and his community recognized him for what he had done, and you know, it was like this was really important to him, and suddenly all of that trying to make it in the Johannesburg pop world of recording and so on was not important anymore. And now we were in the musical theatre
On
business.
our way to
yeah.
where? Broadway. On our way to
Well,
West End.
yeah, and I mean
eventually.
that was a
Eventually.
dream of his, but
Yes.
it was never a dream of
And
mine.
It wasn't, okay.
Yeah, but yeah, I mean, Taliep really had those kind of aspirations. And that, of course, also came true for us.
I'm reminded here of Paul Hanmer, who said, Paul Hanmer, jazz pianist, said, you know, David Kramer and Taliep Petersen cooked hits. It's just a fact of life, which I
It did.
like.
The full stop to his life, in a way, has stopped the story or not. Many artists carry on.
Yeah.
David's still doing amazing work, honouring, I think, our extraordinary history in the region, still through, you know, those forms that make it accessible to people.
I can answer this question in one way, and that's to speak about the way the book is made. I can answer it as a writer. I don't believe there's any difference between what a book is about and how it's made. I'm just going to say that again. There's no difference between what a book is about and how it's made, which is just to say that the way in which you say something is the same thing as what you're saying, right? Okay, so to grasp that, and when I was writing the book, this temptation to, you know, have some sort of epilogue or something that tries to say, but well, hang on, what just happened, you know, and to resist that temptation, and in a way to let the full stop that was a real full stop in life also be a full stop in the book, because all the sort of complex conversations about what Taliep did musically and what he did, you know, historically, they just sort of make way for a different type of complexity that I don't try to unpack because I don't think you can. To just put it there, to let it breathe, and in an almost poetic way, to let the reader think about it, to let it linger. And, you know, it's gosh, I mean, the metaphor that comes to mind is sort of the echoing of a gunshot. Sorry.
Dit lê regtig net 2 minute oor. Ek wil net sê baie dankie vir die twee van julle dat julle gekom het en julle saam met ons gepraat het oor ons ikoon. Ek het nou ingeryg en verby dit sukses. Elke dag kyk ek daarin. Elke dag, het staan nog steeds daar. Tyd vir 1 of 2 vragies. Ek is jammer. Is die hande. Is 'n mikrofoon?
Assalamu alaikum. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. David, Paula en Marianne. Ja. Ek wil net 3 dinge graag sê. En dit is nommer 1 dat ek wil vir elkeen van u hartlik bedank vir hierdie platform dat u vir Taliep kan geëer het. Is net 'n groot jammerte. En ek sê weer 'n groot jammerte. Daar's nie meerder van ons moslim community hier nie. Daar's nie meerder van ons District 6 community hier nie. En nog grotens deel van die Kaapse community nie. As you quite rightly point out at the very beginning, that Taliep was definitely een van hy is van ons. And I think that's most probably the most disappointing part of it. But dit gesê, it doesn't take away that you have people have today really honored an icon of our community for so many years. Ek weet jy wat David is. You've worked with him for so many years. You have done all the research about him. En ek wil my vereenselwig vir dit wat julle hier vandag gesê het. that, look, he was older than me. I cannot differ you on one point, that what you have said is also true. I'm not here to analyze what you've said, because as you quite rightly said, there's always two parts of whatever you've put in the book or whatever you put down on paper. That's for number one. So, ons sê ons in die moslimtaal, baie shukran. Ek kan dit nie beter stel nie. Tweedens wil ek net sê dat ek was net so dankbaar aan die Gerwel Foundation, the artscape that they've honored him in this vein. And lastly, ek dink baie wat miskien wit mense, dat Taliep was ook 'n baie godsdienstige mens. Ja, hoe sê jy? 'n salige mens, ja. Maar in sy privaat, jy weet, toe ek hom kolleeg ken, toe het hy al in die Athlone area gebly al, en hy was nie 'n celebrity nie, maar hy was 'n bekende mens. En yet, as hy inkom om sy skoene op die skoenerak daar in die moskee te sit, of hy het kom haal, dan, how you said, it's everything with a smile. And I think, on that vein, we will always remember him. En nogmaals, baie shukran.
Thank you.
Nadat die oom gepraat het, wil ek amper nie meer praat nie. Oom, baie dankie. Maar ek gaan tog my 2 vraagjes inkry. Toe ek nou die opskrif sien van ons bespreking vir vandag, Mr. Entertainment. Sou het nie, ek het wel wonder, sou het nie Mr. Entertainer gewees het nie. So, dis die een vraag, hou vas. Die tweede vraag wat ek wil vra, uit my kinderdae het ons groot mense altyd gesê, die wit mense het 'n geneigtheid om goed wat onsin is, te kom haal, en dan maak hulle iets vir hulle self daarvan. Byvoorbeeld, hulle het ons 'n ou meubels van my ouma hulle kom koop met die ballenpotjie, dan maak hulle dit mooi reg en verkoop hulle ten duurste. En ek dink nog altyd daaraan, hier kom 'n wit vrou en sy kom David se Taliep se storie vat en sy maak 'n PhD daarvan. Wat sê
Pas op vir ons.
Pas op vir julle.
Pas op vir ons.
Wat sê sy daarvan van daai, ek wil nie sê is kritiek nie, maar is 'n ding wat by ons sit.
Ja.
Dat die wit mense vat ons goed en maak iets vir hulle daarvan. Dankie.
Yes. Ek is baie bly vir die vraag. Dis ook iets wat ek jy weet, baie lank in my kop het. Ek gaan die maklike vraag eers beantwoord. En dit is dat Taliep, die titel kom van die kompetisie wat hy gewen het in 68, Mr. Entertainment. So dis hoekom dit entertainment is en nie entertainer nie, en dit was 'n attempt gewees ook om, jy weet, Taliep was 'n entertainer first and foremost, I think, musically, you know, and not, you know, it was important for him to make people have a good time, I believe. En dan die tweede vraag, ek bedoel, dit is iets wat ek, jy weet, all along mee stap. En hoe ek dit vir myself uitgeklaar het, want dit moet iets wees wat, jy weet, ek moet ook kan slaap in die aande, en ek moet ook weet dat wat ek gedoen het is iets waarin ek glo, en that I've done the right thing the right way. En die enigste manier om daaroor te dink is twee dinge. Ek dink nie ek het die geleentheid weggevat van 'n bruin persoon om hierdie storie te vertel nie. Ek dink eerder dat dit sou miskien nog nie gebeur het tot op hede as dit nie was vir hierdie boek nie. I think that's important. The other thing I think is to en ek gaan in Engels praat want ek dink in Engels. To be really responsible to it and to put the white person in the book as well. To not make as if it's an unmediated telling of a story, but to, and I do hope you read the book, and I do hope that you feel that I have handled the material respectfully enough and that I have entered into the spirit with a lot of respect and tried to do justice to the story of Taliep. Also the strategy of foregrounding the voices of other people. To have Taliep, you know, absolutely collectively created, to not sort of absorb everything everyone says and then make something else out of it that's my own. You know, it's if anything, it's an oral history biography that tries to foreground the voices of the people who knew Taliep, who are, you know, not white voices in the majority of cases. Then I do want to say that I do, again, now it's difficult because I'm speaking about a man I never met, but I don't think Taliep himself, I think he would have been proud, and I think it was important to him to break racial boundaries. I think it was important for him to dismantle that kind of thing. I mean, you can see it in even his, you know, romantic relationships across the color bar from early on. I think Taliep was for sort of interracial activity. At the same time, what you're speaking about is actually sort of expropriation, right? It's taking advantage of. That's the if there is an aanklachte, that would be it. And of course, the world of musicology is full of scholars who, go to Guinea and write a book about Guinean music and make their careers, as you say, make their PhDs. But I do want to say that I think it's interesting you say she took our things and she made a PhD. What is a PhD? It's an open source document that anyone can download at any point to learn anything. No one paid me for it. And it's what I see as a labor of love. That's I guess, the best answer. But ek staan man vir die, if it is an accusation, I'm not saying you're doing it, but it's a question that's in the air and it needs to be asked. En ek staan man vir hom en ek is reg om te sê, I do think I did the best I could. Ja.
As dit met nederigheid gedoen word en met respek. En kyk, ons wit mense is mos advantaged. Ons weet mos om die game te speel hierso. En as ons dit kan doen on behalf of someone else, if you can trick the system. But the thing is, this book belongs now to the ages. En niemand kan Taliep se naam wegvat nie. Alles sit op die bridge, al steel hulle daar vir een of ander rede en ons kan dit weer terugsit. So ja, ek dink wit mense moet ook besluit hulle is deel van iets groter en as jy jouself nie met die swart lyf kan identifiseer heel en al. As 'n mens uit 'n asblik eet, dan is dit jy. As jy dit kan doen as 'n wit mens in Suid-Afrika, dan moet jy fok of Australië toe. Ekskuus. Ek vloek, sorry, ek is van Pretoria. Jammer,
it is part of our history.
Jammer.
I mean, there is a background to this. There is a precedent, how can I say?
So baie dankie mense vir al julle inputs en dat julle hier is, dat julle ons lewens ryker maak met taal en kos en dans en alles. And thank you. One more question here, and then we have to go because there's another show. Please buy the book. I really think you must have it on your shelf. And there's people around here who could sign. If you one last question, very quickly. Yeah.
I cannot source the book. I've tried everywhere, and I don't know where to get the book.
What book?
Kaap Afrikaans.
O, Kaap Afrikaans. Hulle is
Ja.
besig om
Ja, woordeboek.
Die woordeboek is besig en snaaks genoeg is EWK en Rhodes wat die boek
Ek
bymekaar
dink hy is
maak.
nog in
Ja, is nie Stellenbosch nie. Dit is nog 'n ontwikkeling wat vir my so interessant is die universiteit. Hulle doen niks hier. EWK maak hy ding, Rhodes maak hy ding in Afrikaans. Hulle mag nie daar praat nie. Ag man, hulle is stupid. Anyway. Baie dankie mense, baie dankie. Dis nog nie gedoen nie daai boek. Hy kom nog. Jy moet maar net luister met jou oor soos Taliep gesê het. Baie dankie.